Monday, the 15th of August, and I'm so excited to see the number of people who are able to join us here as we will be listening to a presentation by Professor Angelina Maphula from the University of Venda, who is going to talk to us about the importance of conducting research in the rural settings of Limpopo, and in particular, the importance of research among children and the value of conducting research in this setting. So Prof Maphula is a qualified clinical psychologist and academic with experience in both clinical work and in research, and has been employed at the University of Venda for a number of years. And she is currently also the vice chair of the Division of Research Methods, so part of the executive of PsySSA, and was elected as vice chair in 2021 and serving a term until 2023. And her research focus includes child development, also HIV and mental health issues, and she's part of various projects, and the MAL-ED or the MAL-ED project, which I think is one of the projects she's talking to us about today, as well as the VHEMBE project. Angie, if I'm not pronouncing this correctly, do let me know. She's also part of GladAfrica Epilepsy Research Group, and is also part of a multi-country research project. Is this the GladAfrica? Yeah, the Epilepsy Research Project, part of the study, which is now across eight sites, is it? Then Prof Maphula is currently busy with her postdoctoral studies and is a fellow of the Phodiso Project hosted by the University of California in Los Angeles, where her focus is on trauma and mental health. So thank you so much, Prof Maphula, for joining us this afternoon and presenting as part of our colloquium. I would like to hand over to you now to do your presentation. And for those of us joining us, please feel free to add your questions to the chat. We will have a look at them at the end of the presentation, or you can simply keep your questions for the end, as we will have a Q&A session where we will then allow people to ask some questions or make comments as they come up. So thanks very much. And over to you, Angie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Brownie. Afternoon, colleagues. It would be nice just to see on the chat where you're attending from, so that we can see variety, because it is said it's always the spice of life. And thank you for the opportunity to just share my research journey and some of the excitements. Can you confirm if you're able to see my slides clearly and if it's on a slideshow?
We can't see them, but they're not on slideshow yet. We can still see the details on the side.
Slideshow.
Perfect. There we go.
Fine. All right. So I'm going to be talking to you with a specific focus on the importance of conducting research in rural setting of Limpopo. This is where I am at, and I'm going to specifically zoom into the MAL-ED project. I'll give you a background and its multidisciplinary approach, the processes of engagement, lessons learned, some major findings. I'll go through recommendations and maybe just talk a little about the projects that were initiated following the MAL-ED project. Now, with the background in mind, to say it is very important to understand child development fully and also contextually. The reason for that is because children who are growing in different environments will definitely be different. So the kind of caregiving they receive, the kind of the environment they find themselves in, the values, the norms and principles that are enforced on them, will determine how they turn up. And at the end of the day, because maybe of my background being a clinical psychologist, I always think about how is a child doing psychologically and emotionally. So now the need is dire for epidemiological data, that explores the risk factors and protective factors. And this is important because, when we get this data, having full understanding of protective factors, we are able then to enhance such to make sure that moms or those who are caregiving, who are providing caregiving, would, make sure that those protective factors are encouraged. And when we know of risk factors, we are able to deal with them effectively so that it does not have long-term effects on the child's health, child's development, and also their cognition, hence their functioning, and that has long-term effects in their lifetime and their success. Now, my ladies, the etiology and risk factors and interactions of enteric infections and malnutrition and the consequences of child health and development. It's a study project that is, it's a prospective cohort, birth cohort, because we enrolled these kids when they were still, 1 year, just before they even turned one. So the day they were allowed to have, access to them, which is 17 days, when they're 17 days, then we officially enrolled them. But we had to negotiate enrollment with their mothers when they were pregnant. So it's a birth cohort that took, data from day 1 of the child, which is day 17, because in our culture, we cannot access the child before then because of some of the cultural context and cultural issues. Now, this birth cohort then follows the children. And in 2018, we followed them when they were between 7 and 9 years, because they were enrolled in different times. Now, as I said, it's a multi-site study that was started in 2009. And I will talk more about the countries that are involved with this study. Now, research also indicates that more than 200 children aged less than 5 years from low and middle income countries, they fail to reach their full cognitive potential. The reason for that is all the risk factors that are there in terms of, the biological risks, the psychological risks, the environmental risk, and all the other risks that are there that would lead children not to really reach their full potential. Now, due to that, it leads to poor school performance. Obviously, the reduction in economic productivity, meaning that they grow up to be adults who are still poor, while they are raised by poor parents. So the cycle then continues because they were not able to reach their full potential due to various aspects that we will still, go into detail as we move with our presentation. Now, as I said, biological and psychosocial risks play a vital role in terms of how a child's development would be. These would include your nutrient deficiencies, what the child is eating, the diseases or ailments that the child will have as they grow up, the environmental exposures, lack of adequate stimulation now speaks to, caregiving styles, parenting styles, how the parents would respond to their children from birth as they grow. That will have an impact, hence their learning opportunities, and also research has also shown that maternal depressive symptoms place children at a very high risk for poor cognitive development. And this might be because also when the mom is depressed, they are less likely to breastfeed adequately. They are less likely to interact and give responsive caregiving that is necessary for the development of the child. And all this would interplay, obviously, with many other factors, but these are the ones that I just highlighted. Now, with the malady, the questions from my left, you see your independent variables where we have social, environmental factors, where the child is growing up, the home, the socio-economic that is there. which also determines if this child will have toys, if this child will have books, if this child will have exposure to certain things that enhances, cognitive development. Now, we also have enteric infections. This speaks to illnesses that children will pick up, the diarrheas that they will have, maybe because they were introduced to solid food before 6 months, the illnesses that they will have because maybe they picked up a bug, maybe they played with a cow dung, and maybe they ate it and it had some bacteria that were too strong for their stomach, all of that, and the nutrient intake, which speaks now to what is it directly that a child is getting, what are they eating. Is it something that is balanced, from breastfeeding that is expected for 6 months? Is it happening? If not, what is it that is being introduced? And this speaks now to the dependent variables, which is one's growth, the child's growth. If they are stunted, we know definitely there should be something that they were not eating. It should be that they had some ailments earlier on from day one or from the day that data was collected. And then this also translates, as I said, to cognitive development, which is usually not tangibly seen or it's not visible. But when we do testing, we are able to differentiate to see if a child is advancing in cognition or not. And comparing to the peers, we can be able to tell if a child is affected or if there are some delays in other areas. And the last one is vaccine response, because remember that when we took history, we also spoke into if these children are also vaccinated the time that they are due to be vaccinated. So all that would speak to, if a child is eating a particular food, we will then look at their gut functioning and see if there is any impact on cognition. If they were very ill, we will check what is the impact on the right. Now, remember that these zoomed into specific critical periods of development. So even assessment were pitched or timelines for assessments were done at specific critical periods so that we could be able to pick up certain variables that were tested. Continuing on, just to give you a background of the malady, as I said, it's an 8-site study which engaged in observational epidemiological study. We shared harmonized protocols where we had, SOPs, where, standard procedure of operations, and we also have all these manuals that we used, and we shared them harmoniously. And I will talk later into, the differences in cultures, because remember the sites are not uniform. So there were times where there would be a need for certain adaptations in order to make sure that the culture is taken into consideration. So we'll talk more as I proceed with the presentation. Now, the central hypothesis was infections with certain pathogens during a crucial stage of early life lead to malnutrition by causing inflammation and or by altering intestinal barrier and absorptive functions. And this would lead to failure of normal growth and development. Obviously, with growth and development, we also talk about, cognition. Now, as I said, the 8 countries included Peru, Brazil, we had Tanzania and South Africa in Africa, and we also have Pakistan, we had India, we had Bangladesh. So all these countries met, and we would meet every Tuesday, in discussions for protocols for, how data collection is going, recruitment, trainings. We would meet centrally to make sure that everything is harmonized and also we would go through processes of, training and retraining every 6 months to make sure that everything was going well, and also the rigor in our data collection. As I've indicated, in Africa, we had a site in Tanzania and here in South Africa in Limpopo, University of Venda, and the others are in Asia, South America, and North America. Now, maybe just to zoom into where we are at, you can just see if you check my cursor. So this is Limpopo, and we are located here in Thohoyandou, and where we were collecting data, it's actually here. So these are the villages, Chandama, Chapasha, Chivumo, Machabawe, Arambuda, all these villages. This is where we were actually collecting our data. So we had to travel from campus, which is an hour away, to our site on a day-to-day basis. Now, this is where I'm located in the MAL-EDI Technical Subcommittee, the cognitive development portion of it. And we also have surveillance, we have nutrition, we have gut function, we have vaccine response, we have microbiology, where we collected in the microbiology section, they collected stools and urine samples, they collected blood. We also have a section in data management because the data was huge. Now, specifically to MAL-EDI in South Africa, we had recruited prospective participants, which were 362, and eligible was 341 because, one of our exclusion criteria was children who were having low birth weight were not included in the study, or those who were, intending to move from the study area were not recruited, or those who were hospitalized for a period of 2 weeks after they were born. They were not included because that means they already had prior, risk factors in terms of their health. So wouldn't be able to see if maybe it's what they're eating that is maybe making the outcome in terms of illnesses and all that they might go through. So we had to use a particular criteria to make sure that healthy kids were recruited, to make sure that when we compare now what they're eating differently from their homes, then we can be able to say we can see child A and child B eating differently, and what do we see as outcomes in terms of development and growth. Or just there, we ended up enrolling 314, and with birth cohorts or any longitudinal study, there is a risk for attrition, and our attrition rate was a little bit high because we lost 75, and one child died in our study, which is unfortunate. And we managed to retain 238 so far. Now, just taking you through some of the assessments that we went through, it's, with, I can just pick up with a gut. We had to collect urine sample. And, in culturally, if you ask somebody as urine to say it's a sample for research, you should have prepared the grounds very well, because urine, it's kind in a traditional setup. They would say you might, practice witchcraft or black magic if you collect their urine. The same goes for stools as well. And if you check, we also had, different timelines where you find some we're collecting at 6 months, 15 months, 18 months, 24 months. And some of the major assessments, we had to make sure that we pair them so that we could be able to compare them. And if you see with cognitive specific in this corner, with cognitive testing, we had some of the assessments which were done in 1 month, and this we had to collect a data with regards to postnatal depressive symptoms, and we're using SRQ, which is a self-report questionnaire. We did that at 1 month, and we went back at 6 months, we went back at 15, 24 to see if the mom's rates of depressive symptoms would double up as the child grow, or if it's less as they grow up. And this is the pattern that we also were able to see among the mothers. And you can see with all others, I might not be able to say one by one, but you can see there were different measures at different times. Now, beyond 2 years, because this basically occurred, so we had to go and do the 30-month. So it was very intense. I'll just go back. So the data collection was very intense between 0 and 24 months. And that was specifically because we're funded by, Bill and Melinda Gates. So they gave us a lot of money. Now, after 2 years, then we had to now start looking for funding. And for 30 months, we're able to do MacArthur, which is a word sentence test, where we wanted to compare children in terms of language development. And then at 36, we also did the Baileys, and 42 SRQ was done continuously, because then we had to just do that for moms. Now, for 5-year assessments, what we did was the Ravens, and this was collected from mothers, because we wanted to see, research also shows that if a mom is intellectual abilities is higher, they are more likely to influence the children. So we wanted to also compare that, group that in, as a confounder. And then the SRQ, obviously, we also did the child behavior checklist, because remember, when they are 5, they've started now to, show some likes, dislikes. Sorry. And EFT, executive functioning task. We also did the strength and difficulty questionnaire, and WIPSI, which is a Wechsler preschool and primary scale of intelligence. And then we had a schooling form where we collected data in terms of if the child has had exposure of, preschool, if they've gone to kindergarten. So we wanted to also learn in terms of that, to see the differences in children. Now, for 7 to 9 years assessment, then we did the SRQ, Ravens. Now we did it on the children, and then the NEPSI, and then we do the schooling form to, know their schooling history. And then there was an intervening form where we had to find out if maybe they have fallen, major ailments or major accidents, where you find that a child has fallen from the tree, because this is a very rural, traditional place where children still climb trees, where some would fall. And remember that there is a danger if one falls and they're unconscious for a period of time. So we wanted to also pick on that. And also we wanted to also pick up some of the major, health issues, if they are there, so that we can be able to link and pin to our analysis, should there be a need. And you can just agree with me that given the magnitude of the project, there were so many forms that were collected, ranging from, our cognitive component. In the nutrition section, they had a lot of forms as well, that they were collecting data on what the child is eating, on a day-to-day basis. They were also recording the food types, because they have those forms. There was just a lot that was collected. So this is just a sample of some of the forms that were collected. And now talking to research, you can see this picture on the corner here. That is me. This is a community hall, and this is one of the engagements we had with the participants, the mothers. And many times when we meet, we would, halls would be full. Wherever we would call, they would respond in numbers. And this was actually their first experience of research. So now we talk of processes of engagement in terms of clearance, ethical clearance from the host university. And obviously we went to the Department of Health, because that's where we had to also negotiate entry, so that we can have access to the register of pregnant mothers. And then we went to now the traditional chiefs and the civil authorities. We had to negotiate so that they can be on board. So when we call meetings, we will go to the local, halls, or local churches and local schools, according to the villages. And then recruiting of field workers. Then because of the magnitude as well of the project, and the fact that some of the samples, like if urine is collected, it had to be stored in a cooler box immediately, and then it was taken to the clinic, where we had our freezers there, and all the storage that was necessary for the research team. So now we had to recruit field workers from the villages, so to form the research team. Now community meetings were continuous, because you negotiate, renegotiate, and the timing of assessments. And you can just imagine if, say, maybe the cognitive team decides to go collect data, that means the people had to now, make sure the schedule is okay, because remember, with urine and stool sample, that occurred also frequently. So there was a need to always be engaging with the community, with the participants, to make sure that they are, every time we would renegotiate it, renegotiate to make sure that we are on the same page with the participants. Now, on the scientific part, as I said, there were adaptations that needed to be made of some of the instruments, data collection and the explanation of everything as we move with participants, respecting their time, their preferences of appointments. It was just a continuous engagement, as I say, with regards to the process. Now, this is one picture I took one time. When you go there, it is really important to make sure you are, you wear flexibly, because look at this place, it's mountainous, and some places would be rocky. So it's just, the villages. And this is after I had assessed the child. You can see the mom is holding a child on her right hand and a bag on the left, and she was just getting, we had just dropped her from the assessment. And if you see the pictures below, some of these things, as I said, some of the tests had to be adapted, because if we were to show a child in the village this, the child would not even know what it is, but it's basically the same thing as, they are sweeping. It's just that this one is more modern. And this is what we've done with, the tests, so that we make sure that it's contextually relevant to our Limpopian children, specific to the culture and the area where we were conducting our research. Now, I'm going to go over some of the major findings, and this basically it's a combination where I just picked up some, and there are a lot of papers that we have worked on and published with peer-reviewed journals, and some of those journals really, they have high impact factors, because once you combine data from 8 sites, it really carries a lot of weight. And also the magnitude and the value in data that was collected was really massive. Hence, I would really speak to say, go and just punch MAL-EDI project and see the papers that have been out. There's just a lot of papers. But here are some of the findings that we have found. We found that over 90% of mothers initiated breastfeeding after delivery, but given that 90% initiated, less than 1% of mothers practiced exclusive breastfeeding by 3 months. So many moms stopped, exclusive breastfeeding, which is recommended by WHO, for 6 months. They didn't even go to 6 months. They stopped. Less than 1 at 3 months. So that means many children are introduced to solids or different foods before the age of 6 months. And now the other finding speaks to, understanding of the pathogen-specific seasonality.
I think you are muted, Prof.
Is it?
No, we're still able to hear.
Are you able to hear?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. So I was saying that the second was, the understanding of pathogenic.
May you please unmute? You are no longer audible.
We can hear.
We can hear Mr. Takalani. We are able to hear Prof Maphula.
It might be your line, Dr. Takalani. Sorry about that. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Angie, we are. Thanks.
So now what we picked up is, so there is a pathogenic specific seasonality of enteric infections. And this speaks basically to, you know, in our area during the dry season. Sorry? During the dry season, we picked up that we have found that many kids many kids would have those pathogenic specific seasonality enteric infections. They would suffer from diarrhea, and rotavirus was very prevalent. Next is this association between systematic inflammation and length for age, where you find that children who had a lot of diarrheal infections, at the end of the day, you find that they are much stunted as compared to those who did not have a repetitive, systematic inflammations. And now also Shigella had the highest overall burden with a high incident in the second year of life. And the next thing is we realized that lower weight infants were more susceptible to the negative effect of enteropathogens and illnesses. So those children whose weight was lower as compared to their peers were more likely to be affected by, you know, ailments, and they would go through repetitive ailments and consistently so. Higher rates of entopathogen detection and days with illnesses were also associated with low hemoglobin concentration, and also it was also in turn negatively associated with cognition. So those who had high rates of enteropathogens also had lower cognitive scores at 24 months when we tested with and compared with belly. Next was growth faltering at multiple times periods was also negatively related to cognitive outcomes at 24 months. Birth weight overall growth by 18 to 24 months, the rates of growth in 6 to 18 months periods were also most associated with 24 months developmental scores. So if a child's birth weight is slow at 6 to 18 months, they were more likely to be negatively associated with cognitive or developmental scores at 24 months. Another was head circumference measures compared to length was linked to, cognitive scores at 24 months. These are some. And for 5 years, in terms of nurturing home context, in terms of, because we collected data with regards to how caregiving was provided, if the home was clean, if there were toys available for the child, if the mother was responsive, say maybe what would happen is we would go and sit for 20 minutes and we would be observing. We asked the mother to continue her normal chores as if we were not there. So we blend into the environment, to their setup, and then we see if the mom is responsive, because sometimes you find when the mom is doing maybe dishes, if the child calls to say, mommy, some they would answer, some they would not even answer. If the child maybe walks out and goes outside, the mom would not even follow to check if the child is safe, where is the child, what is the child playing with. So we would record those things. So some of the major findings in the 5-year assessments: healthy and clean environment, household wealth, provision of adequate micronutrients, maternal education, and cognitive reasoning. They all had a strong and persistent influence on child cognitive development. Now, there was also a pickup. We picked up that there was a significant association between maternal depressive symptoms and, child development. So when the mom is depressed, we were more likely to see that negative influence on child development overall in their outcome. Now, these are some of the recommendations in terms of looking back just at some of the results that I have highlighted, given that moms are not exclusively breastfeeding. Now, exclusive breastfeeding was not practiced because of cultural and religious beliefs. Now, the recommendation would be to involve elderly women and church members, because what we found is in our area, moms are younger and they go back to school. When they are in schools, the elderly or their grandparents are the ones who are actually caregiving to these children. So now, if we are to correct, or if intervention is to be made, elderly women then must be involved in infant feeding education and promotion programs, so that they would understand the value in breastfeeding for 6 months exclusively without mixing any solid food. And now dissemination of breastfeeding information through mobile phones for young mothers, so that they can also be understanding and also be keen to practice such exclusive breastfeeding. And given the amount of data that we've collected with regards to entopathogens and the illnesses that we observed as children grew up, it was important also to say management of diarrhea in this slow setting is critical, because moms, sometimes you find that they have no idea. And it's only when it's dire, maybe after 2 days, where you find that moms will then rush to the clinics, where the clinics will then give them, recommendations, and also some of the, if the child is it's now in a critical state, then they will have to then treat immediately. So it is important also, we found that it is important to manage this because of what we've observed. And enteropathogens were negatively related to child development, which means that if we can be able to manage these diarrheal and also the enteropathogens, then we are able to then get optimal child development for every child. Now, intervention to improve cognition or cognitive development would focus on reducing the frequency of illness and also improve safety and health environment, and also improving the dietary intake for all the children. Efforts addressing aspects of poverty around micronutrient status, nurturing caregiving, enabling home environments that are likely to have long-lasting positive impact on child's cognition. Now, the adverse of postnatal depression obviously poses a risk for mother-infant relationship and infant developmental efforts or outcome. Now, interventions that would be suggested is those that would zoom into assessing, treating the maternal prenatal, because remember that with depression, it's not all the time where it is only coming in because somebody has given birth. Some mothers are even depressed before they even give birth. They find out that they are pregnant, then they are depressed because maybe it was not a planned baby. They just found out it was just an accident. Then that means they carry the depression through the pregnancy, and then they give birth depressed, and then they go through postnatal depression. Now, intervention would have to assess ideally not only when they are when they've given birth, but also prenatal assessment is necessary in low setting, in low resource setting. Lesson learned, I would talk into preparation to launch a study site, ethical reviews and all that, the training that it takes, and practice and refresher trainings to make sure that data that is collected is quality data. The enhancement of teamwork, going through pilot, translating and back translating processes, which are quite a lot of work that is done behind the scene. And also just ensuring the cultural relevance, because remember that there is no research without the culture. And when we take into cognizance the culture, it is important that when we do that, at the end of the day, there is data that makes sense, and that would also speak to interventions that will come and be relevant to the context. Now, assessment and engagements which are continuous. When you're doing a birth cohort, when you have a project that is longitudinal, it is very important to always make sure that participants are being engaged, and it must be continuous, and there is a need to always renegotiate to make sure that the participants are still as enthusiastic to participate as in the beginning. And there's also a need from the team members to be flexible, know the culture, know their beliefs, their values, be respectful of their principles, and make sure that the team is accommodating. And one thing that is very important is the protocol deviation forms. In longitudinal studies, it's very important when one deviates from the standard or the procedure or the manual of procedures, to make sure that that is recorded. And when there's anything that is of noting, it's important, especially when it's a birth cohort, because if a child then was born normally, now when they are 5, they're suffering from low vision. One would want to document that, because that will translate as they grow. We want to see what is happening, given that the type of food that they're eating was recorded from their young age. Things like when the father is the sole parent is very important to also note it, because then it gives us the variation, if there is any variation, for an example. Now, quality assurance and control in studies, it's quite important as well, and it also speaks to, data quality, and also speaks to the analysis and the implication thereof. And remember that with all the projects, there's reporting to funders where, the practicality of it, logistics, the financial implications, and long-term funding, it's always a challenge. Hence, you find that even now we're still writing to get funded, because we want to follow these children up until they are grown-ups. We want to see where they will end up. And given that we have data from day 17, I feel like this is a potential adventure in research that one would really get valuable findings that would be helpful also for policy, to make impact in policies. Now, retaining participants in a longitudinal study is always a challenge again, and data dissemination has been done also with the community, going back to give feedback. We have heard instances, I did not put them in here, but we have videos that we have compiled. We have done songs to make sure that, our findings are well communicated. Also, they make sense to our cohort. We have also done, animation to make sure that some of these things are documented in a way that is simple and easy to understand, to be understood. And this is done also applying for intervention studies for future research, which has started now. Projects that have been initiated after this, given that we were also collecting data in terms of what are the kinds of food that these children are eating, and also we had to go to the households and find out, the setup, how many houses, if they're using pipes, household issues. And we found that most of the children, or most of the families, were using river waters. So they don't have these modernized pipes in their homes. They have to go to the rivers to do their washing, to fetch their water, drinking water. And sometimes the water is not really clean, but they have to use that water because that is the only source they have. Now, there was now a project that came up, which is Muddy Trial. And this project specifically spoke to filters. They brought in the different kinds of filters to make sure that the community then can start using. And then there was, it was an experimental study where there was a group that was given, there was a group that those who said no, they don't trust these technological things, then they were not given those. So there was a control group as well that was not receiving anything. There was a community that was not receiving any. And of those, then we tested to see if there are differences, if children are now drinking water that is clean and the ones that are still using their river water without an intervention. There's been also a study, HIV study, because when we enrolled, remember that if a child has prior exposure of health issues then was not enrolled, we realized that there was a lot of children who were born HIV positive, and that's when we then initiated also an HIV study. So many projects are still yet to come. And with these two, data for HIV has been analyzed. MADI trial, it's underway, is being analyzed. It's totally clean, but we are now analyzing it. And with that also, it ran for 3 years. So many projects are still to be to follow as we are applying for funding. But the take home is, as we initiated the first time we went there, it was their first time seeing research, a research team and research project, and they were keen to be involved, and they're still now looking forward to more projects. And this is one photo we took. I think we took this in 2013 or 2012. And I'm the second from Dr. Takarani. This is Dr. Takarani, and there's myself, Rezani, Dr. Mpo, and Mr. Mangani. Thanks to Prof. Pascal Besson, who is the PI for the MAL-EDI project and the funding from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And there are numerous fundings that we have heard over the years, and we're still looking for more funding. But take home is, it is important to give children a voice. When we do these kinds of research, it helps the kids to have a voice. So there are certain policies that will be in place to ensure that our children can reach their full potential in terms of cognitive development, specifically speaking on my lane. And I would think I would end here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof Maphula. I'll give you a round of applause from my side. I'm sure our colleagues are joining in. Thank you so much. What a substantial amount of data and hard work has gone into the MAL-ED project, which I think the period that you were reporting on was sort of over 9 years, I think, from 2009 to 2018, now with a number of spin-off projects from that, which is exciting to see. And given that we are in such dire need of good epidemiological data across various kinds of outcomes, so this is really, really incredible work. So I would like to take the opportunity to ask if there are any comments from our attendees this afternoon. Please feel free to raise your virtual hand and we can hand over to you, or to place your comment in the chat. So any comments from our attendees here this afternoon, or questions? So Angie, as we give people an opportunity to think about some comments or questions, and I see Leslie has his hand there. Leslie, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that very interesting talk, Professor. Can you help us understand how you powered the study statistically? That's the first part of the question. And the findings that you were reporting on, were they pooled findings from all the sites or just from South Africa? Thanks very much.
So the first question goes to how we powered our analysis statistically. So remember that when we did, it was an 8 sites project, but what I've reported on is our site in South Africa. So basically what happened with all the sites, when we did papers that would cut across sites, we had to make sure that these were done on those standardized, it could be a questionnaire, that was never altered because we couldn't be able to compare if there were alterations or if there were changes according to culture. So there were some, especially with nutrition, the nutrition component, you find that there isn't a lot of alteration that needs to be made because they are documenting exactly what is eaten. Although it might be different, I think in the nutrition side, they have coding where if it's a veg, then they have a particular codes that they would put in, depending on the codes that are available in terms of nutrition. Now with cognition, certain tests were not able to be analyzed across the sites with the specific reasons that you find that they had to be adapted. And when adaptations are made, then we were not able to compare across sites. So we would only do, we would only do analysis from our sites. And obviously, there are so many factors that would interplay into the analysis. We couldn't be able to accommodate everything. We were having certain variables, like we would look at moms and say if caregiving then influences cognition, we would pull it in. And obviously, as we saw that also when we wrote papers, they would say, did you manage to collect such and such data? We would say, no, we didn't include it in our a project, but it's a good thing we couldn't include everything. So obviously we had to, there would be a loss somewhere, there would be a win somewhere. And our papers would definitely, especially the methodology papers, they outline how we did our analysis, how everything was unpacked in terms of, the protocols from data collections and lessons that were learned, adaptations that were made, so that in the context of such, then one would be able to interpret such analysis. Now, the second question spoke to, what did you say for the second part of your question?
The first part of my question was about statistical power, which I don't think you've answered the second part, but not the first part. Thank you.
So the statistical power in terms of how we analyzed.
No, it's how you decided on for a 9-year cohort study to collect data on about 300 kids. Was that the how did you decide on that number? Why wasn't it more? Why wasn't it fewer? How did you make decisions about that? Thanks very much.
So in terms of statistical power for numbering, I would say that, so when we enrolled, every site was supposed to have 200 children. So because we knew that there is attrition rate in longitudinal studies, we decided we would enroll more. So if attrition happens, then we would still come back to the 200. So this was, I think, decided upon for all the sites, 8 sites, 200. That was based upon as well the funding and the funders. That was the agreement to say funding can be able to manage. Remember the financial aspect of it, to say if it's 200 and across all the 8 sites, that means we had 1,600 children that were enrolled. Although they gave us a leeway to say, let's add maybe by 100, we did that to cover for attrition. It wasn't about the villages that we went to, but when we went then to the villages, we realized that statistically it would still tally when we checked the children that were enrolled for the period that we were enrolling. So it was set before we went to the sites, and that was for funding purposes. Although there was a room to say let's enroll more, but 200 was actually the maximum to say this is what we want. We cannot go less than 200 to make sure that our study has the power that you're speaking of for every site. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. We have one more question. I think we also just have time for one last one, and that is by Daniel. Please go ahead, Daniel.
Hi there. Thank you very much for the presentation. Amazing study, multi-site study with so much data collected. I'll try to be brief. Are there certain planned interventions to be performed using the mental health data that was collected? Because you collected a lot of data from the mothers about depression and the youths as well, looking at a whole bunch of different things. So yeah, any planned mental health interventions?
So in terms of proposals, they are underway. We have been trying to get funding for some that links to mental health, and the other one is with regards to language for children. It's an intervention study as well. And besides that, we have also delivered brief talks with policymakers, also the Department of Health in our province, to make sure that these results are well communicated. And what we're seeing is that it takes a long time for anything to be implemented, especially with mental health, because remember, in the rural areas, we still have hospitals that do not have clinical psychologists. We still have, in the clinics, there are no counselors. So it's a long way coming, but we are really pushing to apply for funding and also make sure that we are also running awareness campaigns in the communities that we've collected data to make sure and enhance mental health among women. And also with the build-up studies that have been initiated from this project, when we go back, when we do feedback, what we do is there are posters that are also pasted around the community in their language to make sure that the communication is not only to say we'll wait for intervention, we're also doing the little that we can just to impact the life of the women, so they are aware that depression would impact not only them, but the fetus when they are pregnant, and also after when they give birth, it interferes with caregiving. So it's underway, and we are hoping that we'll get something somehow. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. And that's perfectly well timed, because we have just reached 2 o'clock and we know that people need to jump to classes or to next meetings. So thank you very much for presenting to us, and for everyone who joined online. Have a good week further. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown.
Bye. Bye. Bye, everyone.